This is a Proxmox Container Monster. Hey, what's going on, guys? Brandon Lee with Virtualization How To. I've got an awesome video in store for you guys today, something I've been playing around with in the home lab. How many containers can you run on a Proxmox host? Well, I am going to take you guys on a little journey on seeing exactly the answer to that question with my SuperMicro E900D. The E300-9D has been around for quite a while. It has the Intel Xeon D2146 processor with 16 cores, but I have 128 gigs of memory. So I wanted to see how many containers can this host or an equivalent host around the same specs, how many containers can you actually run in the home lab? So what I'm going to do is use Docker Swarm to make this a single Docker Swarm container host. And we're going to see exactly how many containers we can spin up on this SuperMicro hardware. How many applications can you run? How many Docker containers can you realistically get on this spec of hardware? Well, let's find out. What I have done is I have created a Docker host template that is running Ubuntu 22.04. I've got Docker installed along with Docker Compose, and I have literally cloned this template to all of the container hosts that you see. These are virtual machines. I experimented around with LXC containers. However, I think the scale that I was attempting to extend out to was just a bit beyond what the LXC container host was capable of. So I resorted back to virtual machines, which I think in the long run for a container host, a Docker container host, was the better move as far as scalability. So what I wound up doing was spinning up 10 virtual machines. So I wanted to hit 10,000 initially. And once I see if I can hit 10,000, then we can see if we can get beyond that. Now, I think this is phenomenal what you can achieve. I've played around and tweaked with the amount of memory that I have configured for each host, and I could honestly go even leaner than 12 gigs of memory. I started out with 16 and I've cut that down to 12 gigs of memory, and I still have some headroom. What I've done is I've created a single node Docker Swarm host. Now, I have created a service on each of these hosts, and then I have scaled the replicas up to 1,000 replicas. So I have nginx containers. I've got 1,000 nginx containers running inside of this first Docker container host and all of the other remaining Docker container hosts. And what I've done is I've alternated between nginx and redis database containers. So I've got nginx, redis, so on and so forth. So the odds are nginx, the evens are redis database container hosts, and I have 1,000 container replicas spun up on each of these hosts. So here's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, so on, all the way down to this 9th host that I can show you guys that I have the replicas scaled up to 1,000 here as well. You guys may be wondering, how did I arrive at the number 1,000 per Docker container host running in a virtual machine? Well, as it turns out, there is a fairly interesting configuration maximum. You can only have 1,023 connections to the default Linux bridge. In my testing, I was planning on going as big as possible in a single virtual machine, or maybe even a few virtual machines instead of the 10 or more. But that configuration maximum, when you get those containers up to around the 1,000 mark, you start to see some really flaky behavior. And I was able to actually hit the configuration maximum of 1,023. And then the very next container that it tries to provision, it will continually fail the task. Now, I've read some blog posts about ones that have toyed around with creating additional networks that were able to get around that. But for my purposes and simply wanting to stress out this host and build a container monster, see just how far I could take it, I just built some simple virtual machines, very lean, and just wanted to see if I could scale those up to that 1,000 container mark. So I just did 1,000 even. So guys, can we break the 10,000 containers on a single Proxmox host? Let's find out. So what I want to do is take you guys along as I bring this 10th and 11th host up to meet and exceed 10,000 containers running on Proxmox 7.43 in the home lab. This will give you an idea just how many containers can I run in the home lab. Well, if you got 128 gigs of memory, you've got a 16 core host, then I'm going to show you guys you can run literally 10,000 Docker containers, if not more. So let's open the console to this 10th container host. And I'm going to show you guys exactly the steps that I went through to initialize the Docker Swarm host, as well as create the service and how the scaling process works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to issue the command docker swarm init. And this command very simply turns this Docker container host, which is a virtual machine, into a Docker Swarm host. This is just a single node Docker Swarm host. However, we're going to now create a service. We're going to say Docker service create. The name is going to be redis. And then we're going to pull the latest redis container image. And we're going to let this service create. Initially, it's going to spin up a single container. So we'll see that after the overall process goes 1 out of 1, which it just did. It's going to stabilize, and now we get the message that the system service is converged. So if we do a Docker service list, we're going to see that we've got a Redis container, and we've got 1 out of 1. Okay, so are you guys ready to scale this 10th host to 1,000 containers? Well, let's do that. So we're going to do Docker service scale. We're going to tell it what the service name is, and we're going to say we want 1,000 containers. Now, this process does take a few minutes, especially in the virtual machine. But as you will see, it will start scaling those tasks up as it works to reach the 1,000 mark on the containers configured. And there we go. You start to see the containers ramping up. So we're already at 155 containers as it continues to scale to reach this 1,000 container mark. Now, how is the host hardware doing? It's really interesting to see what we see with host hardware. I've been monitoring this. We're up to around 80 gigs of memory. We're going to start seeing that stair step up a bit. As you can see, this last notch we can see is starting to ramp up. We're at almost 80 gigs of memory. The CPU is going to spike a bit as we are ramping up those containers. As we can see, we're going to check this out just again. We've got 348 out of the 1,000 that have been created. So we're going to allow this to continue to ramp up as we monitor the system resource usage on our Proxmox host. So wanted you guys to see that we finally reached 1,000 out of 1,000 tasks. So we now have 10,000 Docker containers. And what are the system resources? Well, we're still using under half of the 16 cores and over half of the system memory. So we have some headroom. It was super cool to see that we can actually hit 10,000 containers on a single Proxmox host running multiple Docker container VMs. However, is that as much as we can do? I felt like this hardware had a bit more breathing room in terms of the number of containers, so I wanted to push it a bit further. Let's see just how many Docker containers we were able to get on this Proxmox host. I'm bringing up 2 additional Docker container host virtual machines, number 12 and number 13. So let's see what we can do with these 2 hosts. Let's add a couple thousand more containers to our Proxmox host. So we are continuing to scale up our Docker services. So we have our number 12 host. It is scaling up the Docker containers. We've got number 13 host that has just begun the process to scale up the containers. And I just spun up host 11, which I had accidentally skipped over. So we are on our way to 13,000 containers. How is our host holding up? Well, I just had a quick look and we have pegged out the CPUs, although I don't think this is a permanent behavior since we are in the process of scaling up those containers actively on 3 different hosts. We are seeing that CPU getting pegged out from that process. Once those have scaled up, we will likely see our CPU usage drop. We can also see our system memory on the Proxmox host stair-stepping up. As you can see, when I'm bringing the hosts online, we can see the used memory is creeping up a bit. So we are starting to inch ever closer to that 128 gig mark. However, I still think there is some breathing room with this Proxmox host. Oh man, will we make it? I am at 100% CPU usage on 16 cores, and we've just peaked over that 90% mark on the overall system RAM usage. I'm really wondering, are we going to make 13,000 containers on this Proxmox host? So guys, we are scaled to 13,000 containers. And as you can see, we are maxed out. And I was a bit wrong on the CPUs. I think that we are saturated from a standpoint of memory, so that the CPU is still remaining ramped up. As you can see, we've got 94.9% of available memory used. We've got 100% CPU, and we've scaled up 13 virtual machines running 1,000 containers in each one. While you would never probably want to do this in a home lab to run 13,000 containers, it shows truly what Proxmox is capable of from a container standpoint. You can run Docker containers. You can run LXC containers, not only natively inside of Proxmox, but you can also run Docker containers on the host itself. While that's not really supported, you can do it. So you can run Docker on the host. You can run LXC containers as Docker hosts. You can run virtual machines as Docker hosts. So Proxmox is truly a container monster. Well guys, I'm blown away to hit 13,000 containers on a single Proxmox server running 128 gigs of memory, 16 core CPU, and it really is a testament to just how many applications and what is capable even in a home lab environment with a single host and Docker containers. What is the maximum number of containers you have spun up in your home lab? Have you ever done more than 13,000? I'm sure someone out there has. Well, I'm Brandon Lee. Please do keep home labbing. Stay safe out there, guys, and I will see you guys on the next video.